ahead and get started. So as I said, this is the third in our series of the Confident Career Changes webinar series. And tonight we are talking about translating your skills, and I'll talk about more of that in just a moment. My name is Becca Shelton. I'm an assistant director here in the Career Services Office at the University of Richmond. And my job is to work with you all, our alumni, for career guidance and programming like this. Before we get started and dive into the content, I did want to let you know just a couple sort of logistical things tonight. One, if you do have questions, just go ahead and use that Q&A button down there. We will have a couple points tonight during the webinar because we will be together for about an hour. We'll have a couple points where we'll pause for questions. So I'll go through a few slides and then we'll have some question time if you have any. If you don't have any at that time, that's totally fine. We'll move on. And of course, at the end, we'll have time for more questions. And if you would like to connect with each other on the chat there, you are more than welcome to, or if you would just rather remain anonymous, I totally understand. But again, do appreciate you joining. So what we will talk about tonight is we will talk about a little bit about transferable skills, not a whole lot because we dove into that last week, but just a little bit of review. We will talk about resume formats and tips for that, and cover letters. And so what I'll be focusing on with this is, how to, so if you've done some work on your transferable skills, maybe you've started to think about them or you've identified them for the careers or industries you're interested in pivoting into, we'll be talking about how do you incorporate those into your application materials. And you can see down there at the bottom, my contact information. If you have any questions, follow up, want to connect for an appointment, feel free to reach out to me. I would be happy to hear from you. Before we get into the content, what I wanted to spend just a few minutes telling you about some of the resources that you have, which is really great. The best thing to know about your resources through the University of Richmond is that they are free for life for career services, which is awesome. That is not something that a ton of institutions do. And if you are interested in chatting one-on-one with a career advisor, I'm your person. So you can reach out to me and we can schedule an appointment down there in that yellow box. It's got a link for Spider Connect, which is the platform that we use to schedule appointments. If you are thinking to yourself, Becca, I have no idea what that is. How do I even get on that? Shoot me an email and I will give you instructions and we'll get started from there. But a lot of things that we can talk about in our one-on-one advising, we can talk about an action plan for yourself. No matter what you're sort of looking at doing at this point in your career, we can talk about job search strategy. We can even do things like diving into your resume and cover letter and taking a look at that. Talking about networking. If it's been a while since you've applied to jobs and you're thinking, these online portals and all of these things, I'm not really sure how it all works. Let's chat about it. And we can also talk about doing some mock interviews if you want, if you're feeling a little bit rusty on that. The other good thing to know about resources that you have is all of the stuff that I have done and all of the other wonderful programming that Alumni Relations has done over the last almost year. Hard to believe we've been in this space for a year, is on their YouTube page. They have a really great plethora of resources. So if you have missed any of my content or content that they have done in the past, it is all there in that link. And I'll be sending out these slides to probably tomorrow or the next day. So you'll have access to all of these links. So I just wanted to spend a couple minutes giving you an overview of some of the resources that you have, but know that, Career Services is here. If you find this content tonight helpful or anything else that I've done, and you want to talk a little bit more about your individual situation and how we can work together, reach out and let me know. Happy to chat. So we will, without further ado, dive into our content. So just like I said, a little bit about transferable skills. If you missed last week, if if you're one of my returning people, thank you for joining me again. I do appreciate having you back. I love seeing familiar faces. So transferable skills really are a broad-based set of skills that apply to a lot of different industries, and they are great for people like career changers, perhaps yourself. That's why you're here, right? Or to sort of mitigate gaps in employment. And maybe you are one of the people that fit into both of those categories, right? Maybe you're coming off of a long-term leave, and maybe you're wanting to do a little bit of a change in what you were doing previous. These really are sort of those the things that you hear all the time, like communication, the sort of the buzzwords, problem solving, customer service. And what we talked about a couple weeks ago in our last session was we really dove into, what do these mean for you in particular within the work that you've done. So for example, communication is needed in pretty much every profession. And it can mean a lot of different things depending on what you do, right? So really for you as an individual, based on your skill set and your experience, what does communication look like in what you've done? And how does that translate to what you want to do, right? And where can you use them? All kinds of things, and that's what we'll be diving into tonight. So before we get into because I think my next slide is for questions, which might be a little bit early, so sorry about that. But before we really get into the nitty-gritty with resumes and cover letters, I did want to talk for a few minutes about, understanding job descriptions, because when we talk about, the resumes and cover letters, you're getting those ready, you're tailoring them for specific jobs that you're applying for. But really, in order to be able to make an effective resume and cover letter for a job, you really need to understand the job description. For better or for worse, job descriptions come in all manner, shapes, and sizes. Some will be a couple sentences, some will be a couple pages, some will be really detailed and robust, and some will leave you wondering, what even is this job, right? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because it is really important to first understand the job description before you sit down to write your resume and cover letter for it. So a couple tips over there that I have on the left side of the screen. When you are sitting down to look at the job description, and again, I'm not talking if this is going to take you like hours to do. It's just making time to be thorough with it, right? So first and foremost, save a copy for yourself. This is one of those lessons that I can say I learned the hard way before. But whether you copy and paste it into a text document and save it for yourself, or you download a PDF or whatever, because if you just try to save the link, it might not be there when you go back to look for it, because they might take it down. So somehow save a copy for yourself, because it is really great reference material. And it's not uncommon at all for you to apply for a job, and then maybe a month or two later, they finally call you for an interview, and you're thinking to yourself, I sort of remember that job. And so if you need a refresher or referral, it's really good to have that original job posting with you. When you are looking at the descriptions, use the About Us section as a starting place for the company research that you might do. Really what you want to do here is just get a sense of the tone and the culture and the language of that place that you're applying for. Are they a little bit loosey-goosey? Are they really formal? Kind of what are they giving you in terms of that? And it's a good place to understand, sort of what their values are, which is what you want to shoot to be aligning for. If you get a good job description, which hopefully you do, you want to look at their preferred versus their required qualifications. And so with that, what you're looking for, required qualifications this is pretty much going to be something that they're really, really looking for. I mean, that they are going to be less likely to want to compromise on their required qualifications, and preferred, it sort of depends on the candidate pool that they get. But you should be shooting to meet down there. I like the 70-30 rule. If you meet, a little bit more than half of their qualifications, it's worth applying for, right? Because again, at the end of the day, you don't know what their candidate pool looks like. And you could be a really standout candidate, and you could have other stuff in your background that is making you really unique and making them want to look at you more. Whatever section you're looking at, if it's the required qualifications, the preferred, the responsibilities, usually you can count on the top few bullet points being really important to them, because they're not going to put other duties as assigned at the top of that list, right? So usually hiring managers will rank order them in order of importance. So if you're wondering, what are some of the bigger, more important responsibility areas that you would be asked to do if you had this job, look at the top few bullet points. You want to, of course, address the required important skills and look for repeats. If they're using the same phrasing, words, the same type of skills or abilities over and over again in the job description, that's going to be really important for you. If you read through this and you think, I'm still not really sure what to make of it, you can always try a word cloud. I've got a couple, there's a lot of different word clouds out there, but you can see an example down there at the bottom of the screen that, if you just sort of copy and paste that text into a word cloud, you can start to see which words will stand out more. And that can start to give you an idea of where you might want to focus, right? And lastly, on this slide, making a list and connecting the dots. And so once you've sort of read through the job description and maybe hopefully gotten a sense of what's important to them, really focusing on what are their top 3 or 4 strongest skills or abilities that they're looking for. And that's where you want to start focusing, especially with your cover letter. That's where you want to start focusing that. And we'll dive more into the cover letter towards the end of this. So I think my next slide is a pause for questions, and it is. So I will take a drink of water. And if you all have any questions, feel free to pop them down there in the Q&A. So I don't see any right now, which hopefully means that all made great sense to you. But again, I think I'm going to go through. Okay, so I do have one. So before we dive into resume stuff, we'll look at this one. Yeah, okay. So the question was basically, it took them a few hours to tailor a resume and cover letter. Is that typical? I think it sort of depends. I will speak from my own experience in this. Before I came to the University of Richmond full-time in my role, I was in a 10-month active job search, and I wrote, I don't know, I think I stopped counting at like 40 applications. And I will say that for me, and again, I don't know you, so whoever you are, if you want to reach out and chat, I would be happy to. For me, the first like handful or so of applications, it did take me a few hours, right? Because I needed to, what's terribly ironic is that I had taught this stuff for 5.5 years, right? And then when I had to do it myself, I was like, oh gosh, what am I doing, right? I think it's because when you're doing resumes and cover letters, it's a very different way of talking about yourself. And so the first few can maybe take longer than you expect. But I think with practice, it gets definitely easier over time. And I always found, at least for myself, and I don't know if this is you, but I always found that when I was really excited or like, oh my gosh, I'm really pumped to apply for this. I think I have a really good shot. I would over focus on it. And that's what ended up, that's where I took a few hours to do one, because I was really excited. I want to make sure that it was just dead on and perfect, right? So I think it depends on a few things. Hopefully the goal here is like over time, it would take you a little bit less time and you've got some sort of, language that you can fall back on for other things. And we can talk too about ways to work smarter, not harder for yourself with this, with the applications. Because if you are in a situation where you're doing like a several a week, that can feel a little bit overwhelming. So I hope that was helpful, at least now, for your for your question. But I appreciate that's a really good one. Okay, so diving into resumes. First, I want to talk a little bit about format. Especially for us folks that are, have had more experience, we're doing some career changes, thinking about that kind of stuff. One of the questions is, either like, I haven't looked at my resume in 10 years. What is it supposed to look like? Or I have all of this varied experience, and I don't know what to do with it on my resume. So my best recommendation here is to do a combination resume. So really this is a hybrid, and it focuses on the work history and your relevant skills. You might see some people recommend a functional resume. Those are where you don't really put bullet points. Like a very traditional functional resume will not put bullet points with jobs. I have talked to lots of recruiters over the years, I think, but those bullet points really go a long way in demonstrating the skills and abilities that you have. So there is a desire to see those from hiring managers, and I think they're important. Now, with this being said, you don't have to have a chronological list of all of the things that you've done. Like if you've had 20 years of work experience, you're not going to be able to fit all of that in 2 pages, which is what I do recommend. No more than 2 pages, because honestly, after 2, you're just losing their attention. So I do recommend the combination resume. I do, as a side note, have a really good resume guide that I'm pretty proud of, and I'm happy to send that out with this as a follow-up with this presentation. For you to look at as well. It has much more information than what we'll go over tonight. So what you want to do really is focus on what skills you have and where and when you got them. That's what's going to make this combination resume powerful. If you're not careful, it can tend to get lengthy. So you, especially within that first page, if you're going to have a 2-page resume, in that first page, focus on what is most relevant to that role that you're applying for. Here's a little work smarter, not harder. If you're applying for mostly positions within the same sort of general industry or area, you can have sort of like a base resume that maybe you don't shuffle stuff, or, you don't completely rearrange it every time you apply to a new role, but you give it a really good once over and make sure that those bullet points and all of the things that you're talking about are reflecting things that they're asking for in that job description. Show and tell is super important here, because again, back to the hiring managers, it's not just enough for you to say, I have this skill, but you need to tell them how you got it, right? Was it a certain project? Was it a specific thing that you did consistently at a past job or your current job? So you really want to state your relevant skills and demonstrate with experience, projects, or outcomes. This is what's going to be really impactful for them. I always recommend that people have a professional summary or a relevant skills section somewhere at the top of their resume. You can call the professional summary all kinds of different things. It really doesn't matter. I've seen it called, multiple things before. But the whole point of this section is to connect the dots. And I'll have an example in a little bit. But really it's to connect the dots for that reader to say, here below here is all of my supporting evidence, right? These are the jobs that are relevant. These are the things, the projects, the outcomes that I did. But for what you're interested in, this summary is going to connect all the dots and tie it together for you. So it's sort of like an abstract on a research paper, if you remember those from school, where it gives them a quick synopsis. It gives them the information that they need to be hooked in and say, I want to read more, right? There's a lot of additional sections you can have on a resume. It really runs the gamut. I think the important thing here to know about additional sections is make it work for what you have to say, right? So if you realize that like outside of the relevant experience that you need to talk about, you have these other things, like maybe you are in IT and you need to have a technical skills section or something else that talks specifically about those things that are really important, you know, for your industry, have that, right? If you've done a lot of volunteering or community involvement or leadership, have a community involvement and leadership section. Whatever it is that works for you, it just needs to work for you. And the great news is you have a lot of flexibility with what you title your sections. There's no specific thing that you have to fit stuff into. A couple other quick points here on this slide. Avoiding fancy fonts and infographics. I also have a really good sort of article, and we have some more information about ATS, applicant tracking systems. So if you have never heard of those before, basically they're the bots that people oftentimes complain about with applications. You know, oh, my resume and cover letter had to go through a robot or like a software system first before it even got to a human, and I didn't even make it past the, you know, past the robot. Applicant tracking systems, for better or for worse, they are here to stay. But I will say that on the better side of those, you know, they have really come a long way with artificial intelligence and the technology that AI has afforded them. Way back in the day, ironically, they came about around the Great Recession because hiring managers and HR professionals had just an overabundance of applications. They didn't know what to do with them. At the same time, the technology was there to support it. So they had this very rudimentary system. AI has allowed them the ability to be much more human than what they used to be, but it's still not a perfect system. And so I've got a really good article and information if you're interested in reading about, you know, tips and tricks for how to sort of have a better shot with ATS. But generally speaking, on your resumes, applicant tracking systems do not like weird fonts, infographics, borders, you know, that kind of stuff. So, you know, keep it simpler for that kind of stuff. Templates, I get this question a lot, and this is why I put it in here. You know, should you not use templates? The downside to templates is, you know, at the end of the day, you need to do what works for you. However, I think the downside to templates is that you can't oftentimes manipulate them the way that you need to manipulate them. And so if you know, because your resume really should be a living, breathing document that fluctuates with you as your experiences change and you need to move stuff around. Some of the templates just are not friendly with that. And some of them, you know, you can't change margins. Changing spacing is really hard. You know, you can't move sections around. So, you know, it just makes that a little bit difficult. And the last thing that I have here is really just have a master resume. I would highly recommend that if you have never heard of it. Essentially what it is your own personal document. It can be 10 pages long if you want it to be. But it is, you know, for those of us with a number of years of work experience, how are you going to remember what you did 10 years ago, right? Like, are you going to remember the dates that you were there? Are you going to remember specific things that you did, projects that you worked on? So have a master resume where you can just keep track of all that stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect formatting. It can look however you want it to, but it's just a space where you can sort of, you know, copy and paste and pull stuff when you need it, if you need to tailor your resume to a certain thing. So this is a really sort of rudimentary and pared down example of what I was talking about with the combo format. However, I did want to show it here just so you could sort of see this in action. That section, the professional summary section, I typically, again, recommend that up at the top. That's where you want to connect the dots. And you can put in here transferable skills that you have, tie it into, connect those two industries that you're trying to bridge. And you can even mention in here some soft skills if that's really important to, to the job that you're applying to. And you can do a summary and or relevant skills, especially if you are going into an industry that is requiring some really hard skills, right? Like maybe you're trying to make a transition into IT and you've been doing some, personal learning development on the side. You've picked up some, coding languages or computer languages. I sound silly because this is not my industry, so forgive me for not sounding like I know what I'm talking about. But if this is also a place where you can list some of those, or if there are specific softwares that like Adobe Acrobat or Photoshop, or name any software system or anything like that. Your work history, and again, you have freedom with how you title these sections, but essentially this is where you would want to have your relevant work experience or other experience that would fall into this, be for this job. And then for most of us, you can put education down there at the bottom. So as I said earlier, I'm a really big fan of the summary sections. I think this can do a lot for you because, like I said at the top, it really hits them with the information that they need to know. So this is just something that I pulled from an old version of one of my resumes, just as an example to see, what it could look like. I think when I was in my 10-month job search, I had, let's just say, a variety of versions of my resume because I got bored with it, or I thought I need to revamp this, to get more traction and all that kind of stuff. So I went through several versions, but here's some of them that I had with the summaries, and then the resume guide that I have that I'll send out to you all afterwards. It has more information about creating a summary section than what I have here tonight. But this is just to give you an example of sort of what you can be thinking about or expecting with this. So like with your summary section, I always recommend focusing on sort of those big buckets of skills that you have. And so this again can be some transferable skills that you're thinking about. But particularly for my industry and what I do, the first big bucket of skills was advising, right? Like that's such a huge part of my job. And so I talked about different populations that I've worked with and the different institutions, because in my particular industry, that is important to know, right? And so thinking also for yourself, with where you're going, what is important for them to know, right? Is it important for them to know the different types of audiences that you've communicated with, how you've communicated with them, right? Other big buckets would be project management, program planning, finding creative solutions. Higher ed is all about creative solutions. So, meeting the needs of our populations. And then also threw in some stuff there about some technology skills, because that is very important in what we do. So hopefully this gives you a sense of how to start thinking about the summary section. Like I said, I like to think about it like big buckets of skills that you can focus on. So our next couple slides here, we're going to be talking about bullet points, because once most people get past the formatting, and they think, okay, well, I think pretty happy with how things are laid out or how they're organized. I've got my dates aligned and all of that other stuff that is, just sort of basic and important. The next piece of the puzzle is bullet points. And this is usually where people, get frustrated and tripped up and stumped. And, look, I teach this stuff, but, bullet points are tough to write. especially if it's a past job or even if it's your current job, we're so used to doing our job, and bullet points require us to talk about the things that we do in a different way that we're not used to. So it's a little frustrating. So hopefully some of these tips and tricks will be helpful to you when you are thinking about your bullet points. And really they're a balance of showing your skills, strengths, and your tasks that you've done. My favorite way to think about this, if you have a really robust role, like I've been in a job before where I had a lot of different hats, and find yourself in something like that where you have a lot of different areas of responsibilities, and you're like, I could list all of these, but it would be a half a page, and nobody wants to read a half page of bullet points. Ask yourself, if the hiring manager for this role that I'm applying to could only read 1 or 2 bullet points, which should they read first, right? That's what you want to lead with. So what you're really thinking about is, from that job description, what's important to them, right? You want to give them that important information up front because that's what they need to know. Explaining your impact, and this is not just a task list, like answered the phones, greeted customers, whatever those things are. Explaining your impact, right? Because in that example, your impact would be that you had excellent customer service, right? Things like that. A lot of times the questions that I get to about bullet points are, how, that's really great information, Becca, and thanks for that. I understand the concept, but I don't know how to write it, which is, of course, the challenge here. And so I really like the acronym to think about how you write bullet points. You're thinking about CAR, so challenge, action, and result. That's what's going to give you a really powerful statement with your bullet points. Over there on the right, I've got just a pretty basic example of using the acronym CAR in action. And so when you think about, almost anything that you do for a job, the task that you have in front of you is a challenge, right? And so, like for me, just as a personal example, one of the tasks, if you will, that I have in my job is to create programming like this, right? And so the challenge here would be to create and deliver programming that is relevant to the needs of our audiences, right? You all. And so if you look at this example over here, found new markets for company products in the Midwest. That was the challenge. The challenge was that this company or this person in this role needed to expand their market. So the action or actions that this person took in this example would be that they researched applications for the products in the schools and hospitals in the Midwest. And what is the result of that action that they took? They grew the sales, right? So again, this is a really simple sort of pared down, but hopefully it sort of makes sense, and it is an approach that you can use with bullet points. Sometimes you don't always have a really quantifiable data or information, like growing, increasing something by so much percentage, right? But you can still show growth or development by not having to put a number with something. Okay. And so you'll see down there at the bottom of that example how it would perhaps look on a resume. So that they increased sales to the Midwest by 78% by developing a new market with the public school systems through research. So it incorporates all of those pieces of CAR just in a little bit of a different way, right? And again, down there at the bottom, when you are writing bullet points, a couple of things that I do recommend: asking yourself, is this a big deal? So again, is this related to what's important to this role? Did you make an impact to improve something or solve a problem? So was this related to an accomplishment? And honestly, just doesn't make sense for you to include it. So is this either a core responsibility of your job, that even though it might not be the most relevant to what that hiring manager is looking for, it's kind of a core responsibility that when you're talking about the role that you're talking about, the role wouldn't really make sense if you left it out, right? Or is it just relevant to the job? Okay, here we go. And as you see, we have one. Again, I will just get a quick sip of water and then I will get to your question. If you have any other questions on your mind on the resume stuff that we chatted about, feel free to pop them in there. So the question is, do you have any suggestions or resources for someone working on a CV? Yes, I do. I certainly do. CV versus a resume. Yes, absolutely. Because CVs are sort of a different beast. And they look different and feel different than resumes. So certainly, Renee, if you would like to chat about that, let me know. And I can note for myself, because if I don't, I will forget it. But I will make sure that I include some of that stuff in the follow-up as well. But generally speaking, CVs, I mean, multiple pages doesn't really matter. And typically they are, generally speaking, CVs are more for those in education or research type careers. And you would put things in there like presentations, classes taught, publications, that kind of stuff that wouldn't necessarily go in a resume for another type of industry. Another question in here. What if the job skills or descriptions are vague? Should you copy and paste those into bullet points if you don't have a car example? Well, I definitely would not recommend just straight up copying and pasting stuff from a job description into any of your application materials, just because they're going to recognize that when they read your materials, and it's just going to seem a little bit inauthentic for you as the applicant. If they're vague, it's tough. I think if it's vague, you just go off the best information that you have, again, trying to, maybe look at their website to see if you can gain any more insight or information from that. And I'm not sure how vague you're talking, but if it's really, really vague, if they're giving you a few sentences, that might be a red flag. That might be a job that if you get into it, it's a lot different than what you thought it was going to be, right? So if you're feeling a little bit, if it's that vague and you're feeling a little bit iffy, I would definitely recommend maybe trying to chat with somebody that works at that company if you can identify them in any way, and just sort of see like what their experience is like, or just get any kind of more insight into that. So I hope that was at least helpful for that. Thank you. So our next few slides, we are coming up on time as usual. I am a chatty Cathy, but our next few slides will be talking about cover letters. And again, I have a really good cover letter guide that I will also send out that has, examples of cover letters and just some more detailed information for you all, should you want that. But yes, they are important. I think more than bullet points, cover letters seem to be the bane of job seekers' existence. It is the thing that I think people most complain about. I do not like them myself. It's just being honest and real. They're hard to write sometimes, right? Especially again, if it's a job you're really, really excited for. But a well-written cover letter really, it helps you show your value and brand, and it can allow you to sell yourself. I like to think of this as it really puts the human in your application, because the resume is so much more, in a sense, factual, right? You're giving them skills and abilities and information that they need, but a cover letter allows you to be a little bit more poetic with how you're saying why you're interested in this job and why you're a good fit. This is really where you can take a deep dive into making the connection between how your experience, even if you're a career switcher, is relevant to a specific position. Because I love metaphors, my favorite way to think about the cover letter is like a research paper with a thesis statement, right? Your thesis statement is saying, hey, I'm qualified for this role and I'm interested in it, right? But what good is the thesis statement without supporting evidence? Not really good. The reader's not really going to believe you, right? So the supporting evidence in your cover letter is really those, remember earlier in one of the slides we were talking about, when you're looking at a job description, what are the top few most important things that they're looking for, right? So you are taking that information from the job description and focusing on what are the top 2 to 4 relevant skills that you have that they're looking for. And this is where you can really provide and say more than you can in a resume, provide specific examples of the skills through demonstrated experiences or projects or outcomes, right? And I'll have the next slide, I'll be a little bit more a breakdown of cover letters and sort of the paragraphs in there. But again, you really, to sort of get in the mood for cover letters, if one can get in the mood for them, really read through the company website to understand their tone, culture, and language. Because again, the most basic example I can think of, if you're applying for an accounting role in a really traditional accounting firm, you're not going to want to be real loosey-goosey with that, right? Because they're going to read it and go, I don't think this person is going to fit in here, okay? So you want to try to, as much as you can, sort of understand that and not necessarily match it, but not be way off point, right? And the last thing that I have down here on this is, if you have the option to submit one, do it. I know you're probably going, oh my gosh, Becca, nobody likes to write a cover letter. I don't want to do this. They take so much time. A little work smarter, not harder tip. When I was in my 10-month job search and I was writing, I felt like cover letter after cover letter after cover letter. Here's one thing you can do for yourself. If you're applying for roles that are fairly similar, maybe you're applying for a lot of like HR coordinator or HR generalist roles, just as an example, first industry popped into my head. If you're applying for a lot of the same roles that are fairly, like they're asking for generally the same types of skills and abilities, what I used to do was I would pull up the last cover letter that I wrote for one of those jobs, and I would look through it and I would say, is there any language in here that I can reuse safely that would still demonstrate my skills for this particular job that I'm applying for, right? I'm not saying you need to like copy and paste the whole thing and just, submit it. You want to do yourself, again, the service of giving a really good read through on that job description, giving a really good read through on your cover letter, and making sure that you are matching what they're asking for. But I think my whole point to this is you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you write a cover letter if they're asking for the same general type of skills and abilities. That's my little work smart, not hard tip. And again, the cover letter guide that I have will go into more detail with this kind of stuff, but the next question that I get usually from people that I chat with is, cover letters are important, but where do I even start with them? Because it's overwhelming for most people. So what you want to do, again, from that job description that you've looked at earlier, list the qualifications, both major and desired. And you can even identify soft skills that you've noticed in this. And again, try to drop into a word cloud generator and see what comes up for you to see which keywords stand out, right? Because what you're really getting to focus in on here is what's important to them, okay? brainstorming your roles and experience for each qualification listed in the first step. So if they're, again, in that example, if they're looking for, some management or supervision experience and progressive leadership experience, really sort of look back and think of, from your roles in the past, do you have that? And where can you pull from to demonstrate that, right? And so reviewing your resume for reminders of how you have those skills. And from here, what you really want to do is choose 2 or 3 different qualities or skills from the above list that really highlight why you're ideal for this role. Because this is where you're going to do that, give that supporting evidence on your thesis statement. So your thesis statement is, I'm qualified for this role because I have this, this, and this skill. And the reader is thinking to themselves, great, prove it to me, right? Like, how did you get those skills? What did you do to acquire them? And so this is where you can spend time in a paragraph on your cover letter to say, if we use the few years of management experience or supervision experience up there, what role did you get them from? Where? Demonstrating progressive leadership, that maybe you moved up in roles, and in each role you had the chance to do this and this and this activity, right? Like, this is where you can be really specific and demonstrate to the reader that this is how you have these skills. And my last tip down here, really start by, it's sort of like, I remember a long time ago when I was in school and I had to write papers, I'd always sit down, I would get my name on paper, and then I would go, okay, now I don't know where to start, right? You get writer's block. I think that's what happens with a lot of people with cover letters, is that they get there, they get the formatting at the top. They, get their name and their contact information, and then they put the company name, and they go, dear so-and-so. And then they just stare at their cursor, right? So if this is the case for you, if you're feeling like, I don't know where to start with this, based on what you've done here in the top few recommendations, just start by writing your body paragraphs. You don't have to start with the opening paragraph when you sit down and write a cover letter. Those can wait, right? Get the heart and soul of your cover letter written, and then you're going to feel a lot better about the rest of it, right? Those opening and closing paragraphs will, come to you very quickly. Okay. So we're almost at time. I did want to leave time for Q&A at the end. And I do see we have some questions coming in, so I appreciate that. If you have any other questions, feel free to pop them in there and we will talk about them, because we do have about 10 more minutes left. So somebody asked suggestions regarding LinkedIn, resumes and profiles, industry preferences regarding what they're looking for on these sites. I'm not really sure exactly what you're asking. I mean, if you want to be, if there's something really specific you're wondering, I mean, yeah, I do have, definitely some suggestions and guidance for LinkedIn profiles. I think in terms of maybe what you have on your resume, one like work smart, not hard tip would be, when you get your experiences listed in your LinkedIn profile, you can, those most relevant bullet points that you have on your resume, you can just pop those into the explanation for that experience on LinkedIn. Make sure that the nice thing about LinkedIn is you have unlimited space on your profile, right? And so you can list all kinds of stuff theoretically that you wouldn't necessarily have space for. I also recommend with LinkedIn and your resume, putting that URL of your profile, your LinkedIn profile, into the contact information on your resume and your cover letter, because that also signals to the reader of your resume that, hey, go here for more information, right? And honestly, in this day and age, they're probably going to look you up on LinkedIn anyway. So go ahead and have that information there for them to look at. So hopefully that was helpful with that. And speaking of LinkedIn, I have a webinar on March 9th that I'm doing. It's my next webinar series in March. It's a Lunch and Learn series, and it's called Back to Basics. So that March 9th webinar is going to be focusing all on LinkedIn if you are interested about more details on that. Next question. I try to always paraphrase mission statements and incorporate into my cover letter. Is that a good idea to show you understand the company culture? Yes, it is definitely a good idea. In that, that first paragraph. And again, the cover letter guide that I have will go into more detail about this. But it is really important to have the reader understand that you understand, align with, and appreciate the things that are important to them, right? Because no hiring manager is going to want to hire somebody that feels, mediocre about their company. Like, I see your mission and values and what's important to you, and I could sort of take it or leave it, right? So like, yeah, you do want to make sure that you align yourself with that and reflect that those things are also important to you. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. But yeah, to answer your question, I think that is important. Again, no, I think this is probably obvious to everybody, but like no copying and pasting, and don't make it obvious that you just, you just did that. But yeah, paraphrasing, I think, is a great idea. We have another question here. Follow up on the LinkedIn tips on how important LinkedIn is for candidates. Career switcher, but I don't want to update it for my coworkers to see the changes. Oh. So the first part of that question, how important is LinkedIn for candidates? From my anecdotal observations, some industries are more active on LinkedIn than others. Just for example, like in my particular industry with what I do, if you are wanting to be a career advisor and you don't have a LinkedIn profile, we're kind of like, okay, that's kind of strange to us, right? Like, how are you going to teach people about LinkedIn if you don't have a LinkedIn profile? So I think, how important it is, I don't know. I mean, I will say that it is widely used by recruiters. So if that's helpful. But I think, you can also I've also worked with people who have landed really good jobs without having a LinkedIn profile, right? So it can be done. It's just a matter of doing it in different ways. And again, the way that I always view LinkedIn is it is a tool for you to use. Is it the only tool in your toolbox? No, absolutely not. There are plenty of other tools at your disposal when you are in a job search, but it is a tool to use. Is it a good tool? It's pretty functional, right? It's got a lot of different features that are useful. And so I don't mean to be really wishy-washy with my answer, but in terms of LinkedIn, like I never tell people you have to have it or you have to use it. If it is a tool that you think that you will use and just not have a stale profile, then I think it's worth looking into and using. And yeah, I mean, it would be important for you in that regard. When I was in my job search, I found it most helpful for, one, because it is important for my industry, but I found it most helpful for me personally, being able to, if I wanted to try to make new contacts, networking contacts within my industry and or keep up with the ones that I already did have, it was just a really easy platform to do that, right? I could certainly network in a number of other ways without using LinkedIn, but LinkedIn made it really easy. And I could, also do a little bit of research. Like if I had an interview coming up and I knew ahead of time, like the panel of people that were on my interview, I could do some quick research on them and just see, like how long had they been at the institution, what was their background, things like that. And the second part of your question, don't want to update it for your coworkers to see the changes. I get this all the time. LinkedIn is better now about there are some of those features. So I will say, I mean, if you know that like your coworkers and people you work with are constantly looking at your profile, which, okay, cool, if that's how you want to spend time. But but if you know that they're always looking at your profile, maybe that's something to take into consideration. But honestly, when you make changes to your LinkedIn profile, you can click a button when you're making those changes that it does not go to your newsfeed, right? So it's not going to notify your connections that you've made a change. So the only way that anybody's going to know that you change your profile is if they consciously take the time to look you up on LinkedIn and look at your profile, right? So I hope that sort of helps to answer that. But I mean, it's not like it's going to push a notification to your contacts to say, hey, so-and-so updated their profile, go look at it. So hopefully that was helpful on that. We've got a question here. Let's see. Oh, somebody chimed in with a tip. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, that's a really good tip. Yes, that is a good workaround for those for those systems. Yeah, and LinkedIn is also, thank you very much. I think that was Rachel. Fantastic tool to locate jobs. Yes, it does. And that is part of that functionality that I was talking about. I mean, look, I'm so old that I was on LinkedIn when it first started. Okay. So, and it has come a long way. And their job search tool is actually really user-friendly. It is a fantastic tool. A lot of recruiters, that is almost their number one place to recruit and source candidates, is LinkedIn. And yeah, so again, with the functionality, but if you would like to do a deeper dive into LinkedIn, again, like I said, February, that is our current month. But our next month, March 9th, I will be doing another webinar on LinkedIn. And so we can learn a lot more about it then if you would like. But we are at time, so I'll go ahead and close things up tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for chiming in on the chat. I think that's one of the great things about these the webinars that we do, is that you guys can be resources for each other too. Because we all have different experiences, and we can learn from each other. So I appreciate that. If you are one of my returning people, thank you for that. If you are new here, the last webinar that we have in this career change series is going to be in 2 weeks. And so it's going to be on the 23rd. We did have to bump it up an hour because we had a time conflict with 6:30, which we would normally do. So it'll be from 5:30 to 6:30. And it's going to be focusing on telling your story, because I think that's the one piece of this puzzle that, you think, all right, I've identified where I want to go. I've identified my transferable skills. I feel really good about that. I'm feeling good about my resume and my application materials. And then you get to the interview and somebody asks you, cool, why are you here? And then you don't know what to say, right? So this is what we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks, is telling your story, right? So when people ask you, hey, great, I'm so excited that you want to make a career change, tell me what was behind that, or what sort of precipitated you making the change, and you sort of have to go through things. Look, first of all, I've been there. Had some really embarrassing moments in front of people that were really important, trying to fumble through my story. And so hopefully the webinar in 2 weeks will help you feel better about that and feel more confident about telling the story of why you want to change. Again, I would also check out the rest of the programming that Alumni Relations is doing. It is wonderful, and they've got some really good stuff coming up, interviews with people, just some really fun programming for the next number of weeks. So again, thank you so much. I know we are at time, and appreciate you all joining us. Hope you have a great evening. And again, reach out if you have any questions. If you want to chat one-on-one, I am happy to do that. So thanks so much.